Back in April, a company called Colossal Biosciences announced that they had brought direwolves, ancient canines of Game of Thrones fame, back from extinction. Starting with the cell from a gray wolf, they claimed to have made changes to 14 genes that made the gray wolf genome more similar to the extinct direwolf genome. They took that edited DNA, added it to gray wolf egg cells, and implanted them into surrogate wolves that, a few months later, birthed 3 fluffy white direwolf pups, and the internet went wild. While some media outlets proclaimed the return of a long-gone species, many scientists shot back on social media that these weren't really direwolves. They were just genetically engineered gray wolves. And suddenly, everybody had an opinion on what de-extinction is, what it is not, and whether or not we should be doing stuff like this at all.
So on Tiny Matters, are we now also going to have an opinion on those things? Well, we talked about this a little in a recent Tiny Show and Tell Us episode, so we have thoughts. But today, we're going to be digging even deeper. We're going to talk to some scientists who've been working in this area for a while, and let me tell you, my understanding of what de-extinction means changed over the course of making this episode. And as for those dire wolves, we'll definitely get into that. Welcome to Tiny Matters, a science podcast about the little things that have a big impact on our society, past and present. I'm Deboki Chakravarti, and I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Jones.
So, at face level, de-extinction seems like a pretty straightforward term, right? There was a species that was extinct, and now it's not.
But there are a few words in that sentence that have kind of confusing definitions. First, scientists love to debate what a species is. The basic definition that I think a lot of us learned in school is a group of organisms where 2 individuals can mate and produce fertile offspring. But there are, depending on how you count, between 7 and 27 different concepts of how to define a species. Some definitions are based on organisms that share an ecological niche, others on morphology, others on their specific genetic makeup.
And I'll be honest, as someone with a molecular biology and genetics background, I often lean toward the last one. But even the terms extinct or not extinct are kind of confusing. Generally, extinct means that the last member of a species has died. But a species can also be functionally extinct, meaning that the remaining members can no longer interbreed, or that it disappears from the fossil record or historical accounts.
So this all makes de-extinction a confusing term.
Ecological replacement by proxy through precise hybridization technologies doesn't even lend itself to a very nice acronym.
That's Ben Novak. He's the lead scientist at Revive and Restore, an organization whose mission is to, quote, revive biodiversity and restore ecosystems through the genetic rescue of endangered and extinct species.
And it's like, well, okay, we're undoing the effects of extinction. So de-extinction, maybe that works. And it is a nice short term. The media went with, everybody went with it. I think, we're stuck with it now.
Before working on this episode, when I thought of de-extinction, like people talking about bringing back the woolly mammoth or the dodo bird, I thought about projects where scientists sequence ancient DNA to figure out the genome of the extinct animal, and then try to recreate that genome, usually by editing the genes of a living evolutionary relative. And I really thought the genome had to exactly match the extinct or ancestral organism, as was the case with Elizabeth Ann.
Who is Elizabeth Ann? A black-footed ferret, one of the most endangered mammals in North America that Revive and Restore has been working to bring back. They're important predators in their ecosystems, hunting mainly prairie dogs along with squirrels, birds, and rodents. But the species was thought to be extinct until 1981, when a ranch dog in Wyoming caught one and brought it home, revealing that, in fact, they weren't extinct.
But the remaining black-footed ferret population was tiny.
There were only a couple dozen surviving in 1985. And from 85 to 87, conservationists went out and they captured as many as they could. And they started a breeding program to save the species. The species went extinct in the wild in 1987 when they captured the last one. By 1991, they had bred enough to start reintroducing, and they've been reintroducing since. They've bred over 11,500 black-footed ferrets since then. That's over 30 generations of black-footed ferrets. The population today is around 250 in the breeding program, maybe around 300 to 500 in the wild. That's what it's been hovering around for a while. It's a short-lived species. But those 30 generations and 11,500 members are all descended from just 7 wild individuals. Until 2020, when Elizabeth Ann was born.
Having what's called a founder population of just 7 black-footed ferrets to start with was a big problem, genetically speaking. For most populations to thrive, you need genetic diversity that can allow them to adapt to changing environments and threats, like rising temperatures or new infections and diseases. So the ferret team wanted to see if they could use cell samples that had been collected and stored in the 1980s to clone a ferret that could then be added to the breeding program, increasing the genetic diversity in the population.
To do this, scientists took the nucleus from a preserved black-footed ferret cell and placed it into an oocyte, or egg cell, from a domestic ferret. The altered oocyte was then transferred to a surrogate domestic ferret, where it developed into a healthy pregnancy. Elizabeth Ann was born 42 days later. And since then, 2 other cloned ferrets, genetically identical to Elizabeth Ann, have also been born, and one of them has since had 2 pups of her own.
And those are the first 2 ferrets in the entire program that trace their ancestry to 8 founders rather than 7. And so this is a huge influx of genetic diversity. It's a big launch pad for us in terms of the toolkit.
The hope is that with continued cloning and an ongoing breeding effort, more and more genetic diversity can be added back into the wild population, making it healthier and more adaptable.
For Revive and Restore and others in the conservation community, de-extinction and related conservation work can include bringing a genetic replica of an extinct animal back to life. But it can also include things like finding a different animal that can fill the ecological niche that an extinct animal left behind.
The local extinct famous species in San Francisco is the Xerces blue butterfly, which was the first insect conclusively known to have been driven extinct due to urbanization. Its habitat was converted to a military fort, completely bulldozed, and it went extinct. Well, in the late 80s, early 90s, when that fort was no longer needed for military use, it became a National Park Service site, and a private-public partnership group called the Presidio Trust took over and started restoring the dunes habitat. They brought in plants that hadn't been there in decades. They brought in endangered species and other species that hadn't been there. But the Xerces blue is extinct, so, it never came back. And people started talking, what if we could recreate the Xerces blue and put it back?
A team formed around the idea of bringing the Xerces blue back. Working with the California Academy of Sciences, they sequenced the genomes of Xerces blue butterflies in the museum collection and compared them to the genomes of living blue butterflies across California. They also studied the morphology and the habitats of these living butterflies.
And they started trying to piece together the ecological niche. And they decided, well, you know what? Blue butterflies from Monterey probably could live in the Presidio and take over that niche. And in 2024, they collected 70 blue butterflies from Monterey County and released them in Presidio Park.
And in spring of 2025, they spotted a male blue butterfly.
It's only one, but it proves something very important. One, that the butterflies from Monterey can survive. They laid eggs, those eggs hatched, those caterpillars overwintered, made a chrysalis. This is the whole life cycle in the Presidio for the first time since the 1940s. There are blue butterflies in San Francisco County again. And they're not the original Xerces, but they don't have to be. It's de-extinction the easy way.
This story of the Xerces butterfly really changed my concept of what de-extinction could be and why you might want to do it. For me, I'd always thought of it as having to restore an exact genetic replica of an extinct animal back to Earth. But in many cases, it can be about restoring a missing brick to a habitat or ecosystem.
Revive and Restore's most well-known de-extinction project is the passenger pigeon, which were once so plentiful that their flocks could be 3 to 4 miles wide and many miles long. But by the early 20th century, they'd been hunted into extinction, and that had a big impact on the ecosystems they'd been a part of.
these giant flocks were coming into an area. When they were foraging, they were putting intense pressure and competition on other species that was displacing and changing the community. They were breaking branches off of trees, sometimes entire trees over. What that's doing is clearing out the canopy, allowing more sunlight to the forest floor. And then what were they doing to the forest floor? They were coating it in guano. And this might be a light coating of guano at a breeding colony, but at a roost, after a few days, this could be several inches to a foot deep. Over the ensuing years, that guano breaks down, becomes a fertilizer, and whether it's a couple of years or 10 years, depends on the cycle, eventually that resets the whole ecosystem and you get new growth, different types of plants utilizing the area. You have sunlight coming in, creating that really rich habitat. And this is what we see after fires and after storms. And we see this incredible regrowth of life.
The hope of reviving the passenger pigeon is that it can be reintroduced into these forests and bring back biodiversity that's been lost since their passing. The band-tailed pigeon, a closely related relative, is acting as the starting point for much of this work, as they're already 97% identical genetically to the passenger pigeon, though they have distinct behavioral and ecological differences that the team hopes to modify through gene editing. The team is also going out into the field to conduct studies on how breaking branches and dumping guano into forests will affect current habitats, ideally for the better.
And so while we're doing the biotech in the lab with various partners in New York and other places to create the tools we need to recreate a passenger pigeon, at the exact same time, we're going to be experimentally evaluating that ecology and gaining information, not just about what they did in the past, but what impacts they'll have today and in the future.
And this, for me, is really where my new understanding of de-extinction has come to settle. In the idea of making something that can fill a missing gap in the ecosystem left behind by an extinct animal. And this isn't just a gut feeling. It's actually a definition by the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which says, quote, "A proxy of an extinct species is the production of a functional equivalent able to restore ecological functions or processes that might have been lost as a result of the extinction of the original species."
And they also define de-extinction as, quote, "any attempt to create some proxy of an extinct species or subspecies through any technique, including methods such as selective backbreeding, somatic cell nuclear transfer or cloning, and genome engineering."
Proxy just doesn't sound as thrilling as de-extinct clone, you know? So, let's talk about those direwolves.
There's been a lot of debate online about whether or not the wolves that Colossal created can even really be considered direwolves. They've put out a press release and a preprint article about the work they've done, claiming that in sequencing ancient direwolf and modern gray wolf DNA samples, they identified a short list of 14 genes that they could tweak to give the gray wolves a phenotype that more closely matched the direwolves. Things like a larger size, coat color, larger teeth and jaws, etc.
But it's important to note, no one alive today has ever seen an actual direwolf. And there aren't even written historical records like there are for things that have gone extinct in recent centuries, like the passenger pigeon or the dodo bird.
And then it begs the question of, what do we actually know about direwolves as a baseline? Everything we know about direwolves is from their skeleton. So if they want to say, yes, we have real direwolf traits, not just direwolf genes, they have to be able to, when these animals are about 18 months old or older at full adult stage, they have to go out and they have to do full body CT scans on these animals. They need to know every detail of their skeleton, and they need to do that for the original wolves that they gene edited or the same genetic stock of wolves at the same age as a control. You know, to say it's a howl that's different, they need to go out and they need to measure howls of gray wolves around the world and go, is their howl somehow changed because maybe the vocal cords are a different shape now or something? Like their howl could be different, but there's no data to back that up.
There are so many elements that cannot be captured by things like genetics, and that pains me to say as a geneticist. But there are things like behavior, the role of the environment, how it interacts with the genetics. That's just not factored into this in any way.
That's ecological geneticist Sean Buckley, a lecturer in molecular ecology and environmental management at Edith Cowan University in Perth, Australia.
We really have a good idea of whether or not this thing that's been produced even represents a direwolf, what it would look like, how it would behave, what it would do in the ecosystem.
As someone working in conservation, Sean thinks a lot about the reasons why scientists and organizations choose to put effort into one species over another. Sometimes, of course, it's the charismatic megafauna, the cute and cuddly animals that get the most attention. But in many scenarios, work focuses on animals whose reintroduction could have a beneficial impact on the broader ecosystem.
And the more we know about how different species interact and create these kind of holistic, interconnected environments, the better they support clean water and air, they support better resource use, they contribute even to positive physical and mental health. We're seeing a lot more of that in terms of the urban ecology space. So we know having these high biodiversity parks are actually a lot better for mental health and physical health outcomes for people as well, just by having a park that's got all of these wonderful plants and animals in it. So there's a whole range of different reasons that supporting just all biodiversity is really important, and why you should care about even the things you don't know that you should care about is that the stronger or the more species you've got in an ecosystem, the stronger it is, the more resilient it is, and the more benefits it feeds back to people and the environment.
This is why projects that overlap with conservation and de-extinction often focus on animals that have recently gone extinct. By bringing them back, conservationists can hope to fill the hole they've left in the ecosystem and restore it. Beyond that, de-extinction can offer a way to make amends with our past environmental mistakes.
This idea that we can sort of absolve ourselves of past sins is this idea that we have these species that have gone extinct, and we have a certain level of culpability for that. We've all had those things we've done in the past that are embarrassing. We've got cringy stuff we did as a high schooler or something. And don't you wish sometimes you could go back in time and not make that mistake? I think de-extinction hits that kind of same niche. It's the idea that we made this mistake in the conservation of a species. We know we've done something wrong and it's disappeared. But now we have this amazing technology that might help us sort of alleviate that guilt and sort of make amends for what we've done, essentially.
But the dire wolves don't really fit this bill because they've been extinct for over 10,000 years.
I don't think it counts as de-extinction. I don't think it counts as conservation. And that's actually the official stance of the IUCN Canid Specialist Group. They had a statement on it, mostly because we're talking about a species that went extinct tens of thousands of years ago. It's not usually within the remit of conservation biology in terms of, trying to save species that have been impacted by humans. This is so long ago that climate was probably a big factor. We know they were outcompeted by grey wolves and things like that. So it's not even really a conservation story in my mind.
The dire wolf's habitat is long gone, and there's no clear spot in any ecosystem where they can meet an unmet need.
There is no modern ecological context for a dire wolf ecotype, which was once a very common ecotype throughout the whole Arctic because of the super megafauna that existed. If we get a whole bunch of super megafauna back, maybe we would have a place for dire wolf-like ecotypes.
That's Ben again.
But the gray wolf is the perfect apex predator for the ecosystem we have today. Gray wolves take down adult moose, muskox, and bison, the three largest megafauna of the whole Arctic region. The only larger animals are in Southeast Asia and Africa, a place that never had real kind of dire wolves. They've got hyenas and other kind of wolves and things. And so from a de-extinction standpoint, scientifically, we cannot accept or reject the claim at this time. But none of this gets to the why, and none of it gets to whether or not this was the appropriate use of science.
Why make a dire wolf in 2025? Colossal has argued that the techniques they've developed in this project can be used in other places, like helping restore red wolf populations, a project that they also more quietly announced at the same time as the dire wolves. But why not just focus time, effort, and resources on a recently extinct species? Why a dire wolf?
It's, for me, an ethically dubious thing to gene edit a wild organism simply to advance the science, when there's no clear end goal that helps the environment. And helping the environment in terms of generating interest and donor dollars and making a tool that gets used for conservation, you can argue that, but you don't need to gene edit a wild animal to do that.
Sean told us that this is why he tries to emphasize the idea that this form of de-extinction effort fits more into the biotechnology sector.
There are some arguments from conservation biologists that it is detracting from the story of actual conservation work that's happening on the ground, and that the logic being that money, and it's a lot of money to create 3 wolves, if that was invested in conservation, instead we probably could have saved hundreds of species and done some real massive scale environmental restoration. My perspective on that is that I actually don't think that money traditionally would ever have been allocated to conservation. These biotechnology companies are developed to really try and angle this sci-fi element to develop the technology to do these things. But again, they're not a conservation agency and it's not really their purpose.
And it ends up with 3 animals that live on a reserve whose sole existence is simply to satisfy a scientific curiosity. We as a society and scientists, we have a responsibility to be better than that.
Okay, let's tiny show and tell.
Let's do it.
Deboki, I'm going to tell you about shrinking clownfish.
I almost did this.
Okay, whew, close call.
First of all, I'm glad because I didn't read that much about it. So like you're going to tell me about the thing that I almost did and I'm going to finally get to learn.
There you go. It's perfect. Everyone is happy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think most people know what a clownfish looks like, probably because of Finding Nemo. Nemo is a clownfish. They're very cute. So researchers have found that clownfish will actually shrink to survive heat stress.
Ooh.
So what this team did was during a marine heat wave, which is sadly pretty common at this point, they measured the length of 134 clownfish every month for 5 months, while also, of course, keeping track of the water temperatures, measuring that every 4 to 6 days. And what they saw was that the clownfish were getting shorter, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
And apparently, by shrinking, like getting shorter, it increased a clownfish's chance of surviving the heat stress by as much as 78%.
So just to clarify, are they measuring like the same clownfish?
Yes.
Like,
so there is a way, I didn't realize, but they were able to tag these clownfish. They were able to really make sure it was, for sure, the same clownfish that they were measuring at these different points. Yes. Because first I was like, how do you do that with clownfish in the wild?
right.
But they did. And I think they've been studying this group for a while for other things too, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like a whole other conversation about like studying these fish. So I'm like, but they're so small.
Yeah.
And this is the ocean. But yep, they stick around the same area. And so they were able to do this.
Yeah, it's just like their little population of clownfish they study.
I know.
I want to know if they have like a favorite clownfish.
I'm sure.
If you worked on this and you have a favorite clownfish, tell me their name.
I know. I want to know their name for sure. Except it would be really sad if you're studying heat waves and they're ones
True.
that don't survive.
Fair.
I don't know. I see the flip side of that coin.
Yeah.
So these clownfish seem to have a higher chance of surviving heat waves when they shrink alongside their breeding partner.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time, apparently, that a coral reef fish has been shown to reduce their body length in response to an environmental stress.
That's really wild.
How do they do it? Researchers don't know. But in a press release, the lead author, Melissa Versteeg at Newcastle University said, quote, "This is not just about getting skinnier under stressful conditions. These fish are actually getting shorter. We don't know yet exactly how they do it, but we do know that a few other animals can do this too. For example, marine iguanas can reabsorb some of their bone material to also shrink during times of environmental stress."
Where does it go?
I know. And so, yeah. And then she follows that by saying, like, this was really surprising.
Yeah.
You know, we were measuring each fish individually over a period of about 5 months. And I guess in the end, 100 fish shrank out of the 134 that they studied.
Wow.
Pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, is it like a downstream effect of something else? Like, is this the primary, like, mechanism that's like helping their survival? Or is there something else they're doing that's helping their survival? And like, one of the results of that, it's also that they get shorter.
Yeah, no, totally. But it's just, that's a wild thing, like getting shorter. Like if I wasn't eating or something, I'm not, maybe I might get a little bit shorter, right? But like barely.
Yeah.
I'm mostly just going to like decrease in circumference.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, like I wonder what it is also about getting shorter. Like what is it that helps them? Yeah, what is the thing that's helping them survive?
It's fascinating.
If I were an irresponsible science writer, I would take this opportunity to be like, shorter people are going to survive heat waves better.
Yes. But
I'm responsible.
However, I'm a tall person.
Well, Sucks to be you, Sam.
Yeah.
Well, that was really cool. I'm here to talk about soccer, which probably doesn't seem very sciencey, but
But you're a soccer person. You're a big fan.
I am a big fan. Obviously, soccer is not soccer to many people. It is football, but I'm going to call it soccer because I think it's less confusing when American people say soccer versus football.
I agree, unfortunately.
Yeah. So recently, archaeologists think that they have found what is the oldest soccer field in the world, and it is in Scotland. If they're right, this could be a big deal because it could potentially undermine England's claim to have the origins of soccer.
I was like, there's going to be some UK drama now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So in general, people have believed that the origins of soccer goes back to a game called mob football, which sounds completely wild.
Sounds like rugby.
Yeah, no, I think it kind of basically is. So it was played in the British Isles during the Middle Ages and involved hundreds of players who would get split into two teams, and they would just go into a big scrum and like try to get control of a ball. It could go on for a very long time, like hours, sometimes even days. So like an absolute nonsense game as far as I'm concerned. But at some point in the 19th century, someone in England wrote up a rule book that got adopted by the Football Association. And this is why people kind of claim England is the origins of soccer. Like that is where it originated.
Got it.
So how did people find this potential field? There was a letter from a pastor in this area where he complained about people playing football on Sabbath afternoons at a farm. And so apparently he was mad about it because he was like, that's not what you should be doing. So he had people set up these stones across the pitch to get people to stop playing. So this was documented in this letter. So archaeologists went to the farmland in the area to see, like, could they find evidence of a pitch that had been covered in stones? And they found this flat area of land with 14 big rocks on it, which they say, along with other accounts they found, is like indicative that this is a soccer pitch. Like this is where people were playing. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some people also say that this doesn't mean soccer was actually the thing being played here. Like even if
it's kind of hard to prove that.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't care because my favorite thing about soccer is the absolute ridiculous drama that it stirs up. And so I love this because I think it gets to the core of what soccer is about, which is like countries hating each other, right? Like just over things that feel just a little bit unnecessarily petty, but you know, it's there. So that's why I really enjoyed this. And also because it's cool to see how they kind of went through the clues to find a possible land that could have been a soccer field.
I love that. That's so interesting. I can't wait to keep up with the soccer drama, you know?
I'm always here to explain soccer drama to people. It's like how I finally got invested in soccer after years of watching my husband watch soccer. I was like, oh.
This is very dramatic.
These people are silly.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Tiny Matters, a podcast produced by Multitude and brought to you by the American Chemical Society, a nonprofit scientific organization based in Washington, D.C. This week's script was written by Alex Danis and edited by me and Michael David and by Sam, who is also our executive producer. It was fact-checked by Michelle Boucher. Audio editing was done by Jeremy Barr. The Tiny Matters theme and episode sound design was by Michael Simonelli and the Charts and Leisure team.
Thanks so much to Ben Novak and Sean Buckley for joining us. We'll see you next time.